'Tis strange, my Theseus, that these lovers speak of. More strange than true. I never may believe these antique fables, nor these fairy toys. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold, that is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes, and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 4. Welcome back to Professing Literature, coming to you from downtown Oklahoma City on a bright November day in the year of grace 2021. Professing Literature is, of course, the podcast where we look closely at short passages of important works of mostly English literature in the hopes of seeing writers in action, working across literary modes and genres, and looking at the dynamics of a passage in order to understand what the author is doing, the issues that are clarified, the techniques involved. I'm David Anderson. I teach Renaissance literature at the University of Oklahoma in the Department of Classics and Letters. And as always, I'm joined by Mr. Eric Williams. Good afternoon, Eric.
Good afternoon, David.
So here we are back again with our fits and starts as we seek to find our podcasting rhythm. We've had a hiatus, and the listener will have had Beowulf and 2 episodes on Eliot's Proofrock not too long ago. But for us, this is coming back after a time away, so it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's really good to be back.
Yeah.
Feel like there's a part of me that's been missing.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. That professing literature chunk. I know I've felt the absence myself. And so, I was pleased that we could sit down today and do this. I'm also pleased at the response we've had so far. I won't say it's been in the millions, but it's been pretty good in terms of download rates and, some very kind emails that we've had, some ratings and things like that. I'll take this opportunity to remind our listenership that you can, of course, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you prefer. And you can rate us, give us that number of stars that you think we merit. And please, by all means, email also. Our email address is
ProfessingLiterature@protonmail.com.
All right, very good. So we've had men and women, old and young, in school, long since out of school, get in touch. And that's been a wonderful thing. I know our listeners will be wondering, Eric, we are still waiting on sponsorship opportunities.
Yeah.
So, it can only be so much longer that, this sort of global commerce doesn't stop. And it's, people want to attach their brands to other brands that are hot. And so we'll just be here waiting for them when that moment comes.
There's nothing hotter than a literature podcast.
Yeah, that's right. It's just got that something, that crackle about it. And we'd be happy to consider a wide variety of products or services. I think luxury brands are something that we could sell especially convincingly. So if you're in the marketing department at, say, Jaguar, we're open to working with you. We'll hear a pitch. We would hear a pitch and consider it. I would do my best to say Jaguar, because that's how they say it on the commercials. It's not Jaguar. We know better than that. Jaguar. I think high-end whiskey is something we'd be interested in standing behind. And we would consider payment, if, could be just cash, or it could be, cash and product, something like that. But we can work that out.
Didn't you have, in one of the episodes, you had like a brother-in-law or somebody that
that's right,
wanted to shout out or something?
Yeah,
you gave
Danny.
that one for free, Danny.
Yeah, that was gratis, not just for him, but for anyone who wanted to see how that felt. And so, we haven't yet established a whole separate email address just for sponsorship offers. So you can just use the Professing Literature Proton mail that Eric mentioned. We are very much a kind of eager, lean, mean startup. So we haven't built out the marketing and all of that, but we are here and raring to go. But in the meantime, we'll talk about literature. So this is our 10th episode. If I've run out of fingers counting, so we are at our 10th episode, and so it seemed like it was time that we got back to Shakespeare. Can only stay away for so long. In contrast, though, to where we began in the nightmare of Macbeth, we're in the middle of a dream tonight, or at the end of a dream. It's not necessarily a comforting dream or a simple one, but it's a beautiful one. So we're talking about Shakespeare's early comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream, probably written in about 1594 or thereabouts, when he was still in the first quarter or so of his career as a professional dramatist in the London theater world. For me, it's I think Shakespeare's first masterpiece. It's around about this time that he's writing Romeo and Juliet. He's also written history plays. He's written comedies like Love's Labour's Lost, The Taming of the Shrew, The Two Gentlemen of Verona. But I see A Midsummer Night's Dream as the first, a perfect play he writes. And a lot of people know this play well. A lot of people have studied it. A lot of people have seen it, even if they haven't read much Shakespeare apart from that. It's an immensely popular play, and it's such a popular play that we might sometimes take for granted just how strange it is, because it is a very weird play. If you sort of survey Shakespeare's comedies, the dozen or so comedies he wrote over the course of his career, no two are alike at a deep level, but A Midsummer Night's Dream is very odd, but odd in wonderful ways. It's filled with incredible flights of poetry, and it's made up of no less than 4 plots, which are spliced together. We have 4 groups of characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream. First, we have the Duke and Duchess of Athens. The play is set in the mists of prehistory, in mythological Athens. And so the Duke of Athens is Theseus or Theseus, straight out of Greek mythology. And he is about to get married to Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, whose people he has conquered. There's the sphere of the royal wedding at the court of Athens. Then there are 4 young Athenian aristocrats, 2 men and 2 women. And these are the young lovers. And so within the play, there is the sort of traditional Roman comic dynamic of ardent young lovers and a so-called heavy father, this parent figure, Aegeus, who's trying to block the union of one young man with his daughter and send her into the arms of another young man whom he has chosen. So we've got the Duke and Duchess, the court. We've got the young lovers who kind of have one foot in the court, but will go beyond it. We have a group called the rude mechanicals. That's a phrase used in the play, meaning the sort of primitive or uneducated or rustic craftsmen. So a group of lower class characters. And then the fourth group of characters, strangest of all, are the faeries. And so we've got this very complex plot with these different groups of characters, and yet it all hangs together effortlessly. And so already Shakespeare is showing at this fairly early point in his career that he has a remarkable ability to keep multiple balls in the air at the same time. Each of these plots sheds light on the others. And I'll do a little bit of a recap of the play. Not a full recap, but just enough to, if you don't know the play or if you're rusty on it, it will be just enough to kind of get you up to speed for where you need to be. The sphere, the level of the court, the Athenian court. We have Theseus and his betrothed, Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. And they are to be married very shortly. And so there's going to be celebration that follows this wedding. We then have the young lovers. Hermia, one of the young women, is supposed to marry a young man named Demetrius. That's what her father wants. Her father Aegeus insists on that. But Hermia is in love with Lysander. And so Lysander and Hermia want to be married. Demetrius wants Hermia and thinks he's entitled to her. And finally, the fourth member of this group, Helena, Hermia's old friend, is in love with Demetrius. Demetrius has no interest in Helena. He only wants Hermia, the woman who says she doesn't love him because she loves Lysander. And so Hermia's father, Aegeus, within the first page or so of the play, comes to Theseus, the Duke of Athens, and says, Athenian law says that if my daughter disobeys me, I get to take her life. And so I want you to compel her on pain of death to marry Demetrius. And Theseus, who doesn't really want blood spilled, right when he's about to be married, tries to soften this. And he says, well, maybe we can put her in a nunnery in perpetuity instead of having her killed. But Hermia, you heard your father, you have to marry Demetrius. And so Hermia and Lysander plot an escape. They're going to get out of Athens and go to an old aunt who lives outside of Athenian jurisdiction, and they're going to get married. And they're going to go through the neighboring forest. They're going to leave tonight. They're going to cut through the forest, and then they'll be free and clear and able to get married. The only problem is Demetrius gets wind of this plot and ends up following them, and Helena follows him because she's in love with him. And so we have four young lovers in the forest. At this time, that other group of human beings that I mentioned, the rude mechanicals, these artisans or craftsmen, are getting together to rehearse a play that they want to perform. They want to perform a play in honor of the royal wedding. This is the kind of thing that would happen at grand state occasions in Elizabethan and Jacobean England. Local groups within the city of London would offer various entertainments in celebration of a royal progress or something like that. And so the rude mechanicals, this group of artisans, are going to perform a play. It's a play called Pyramus and Thisbe, which is a sort of Romeo and Juliet story of doomed love. If you know, say, you're Ovid, you'll know the story. This is the play they're going to put on. The rude mechanicals are very funny. They're confused. They don't know what they're doing. Shakespeare is having a laugh as a professional theater man. He's having a laugh at the idea that these amateurs would be able to produce a play that was worth watching, although I think he's having a generous laugh at them. And so all of these men are getting together and casting their parts. Someone named Peter Quince is the sort of director impresario figure. And he's trying to organize everyone and get them comfortable in their roles. And he has a secret weapon. And his secret weapon is a man named Nick Bottom. Bottom is a weaver, and according to everyone around him in this group, he is a genius. Bottom is going to play the lead role of Pyramus, and people defer to him, and it's funny because Bottom is one of Shakespeare's great clowns. He's one of my favorite Shakespearean characters. Bottom is bumbling, he's vain, and he's confused, but he's got absolute confidence in his abilities, whether it comes to acting or anything else. And so the rude mechanicals are going, their plan is to go to the sort of verge, the edge of the forest this night and rehearse their play in private so that they can be ready to go when the marriage happens. Finally, you have the fourth group of characters, the faeries. Oberon and Titania are king and queen of the faeries, and they are in the neighborhood because of the royal wedding, because as one king to another, Oberon wants to bless Theseus on his wedding day. However, the king and queen of the faeries are not getting along. Oberon and Titania have been at loggerheads for months. They have a deep dispute over something we won't get into, but, it's the Indian changeling boy, if you know the play. It's this pretext for an argument that's gone on for a long time, a savage argument. And Oberon and Titania are so angry at one another that the natural world is sort of quaking because of their discord. And so crops are dying in the fields and the seasons are deranged and everything is out of whack. So Oberon, the king, wants his wife, Titania, to submit to his will. And he concocts a kind of strange plan to make this happen. He has a love potion that, if dabbed on the eyes of someone, will make them fall in love with the first thing they look upon. And so he tells Puck, Robin Goodfellow, this trickster figure who is sort of one of his minions, he tells Puck that when Titania goes to sleep tonight in the forest, you're going to anoint her eyes with the love potion. And when she wakes up, she's going to fall in love with the first thing she sees, some animal. And she's going to make a besotted fool of herself because she'll be so in love. And so I think Oberon thinks this will give him some kind of leverage of embarrassment over his wife that will mean that eventually she'll just give in and he can cancel out the love potion, and she'll do what he wants. So that's his plan. Have her fall in love with something ridiculous. And Puck pulls it off. He spies the rude mechanicals rehearsing on the edge of the forest, and he recognizes that Bottom is the most ridiculous of all of them. And so he changes Bottom's head so that Bottom has the head of an ass. And then Titania sees Bottom when she awakes from sleep and falls in love with him. And so for a few hours, Bottom becomes the beloved, doted upon paramour of the queen of the faeries, the beautiful queen Titania. And she takes care of him and has all of her fairy attendants wait on him, and he thinks he's in heaven. The four young lovers are tearing it up, arguing at each other's throats. Oberon attempts to intervene because he overhears two of them arguing, and he wants everyone to be happily in love. And so he tells Puck to use that potion so that the lovers love the right person. Puck makes a mess of things. And so a love triangle where two young men both love Hermia gets swapped out for one where both of them, for a time at least, end up loving Helena. And it's very chaotic, and it's almost violent. It could turn violent. It could turn into that tragedy of doomed love of the sort that the mechanicals were going to perform. But Oberon and Puck end up putting everything back to rights. And so when the night in the forest is over, the four young lovers will all be straightened out. Demetrius and Helena are happily in love. Hermia and Lysander are happily in love. There's no more conflict. Bottom has his head back, and Oberon will reconcile with Titania. And all of this happens just in time for the Duke of Athens, Theseus, to get married to his bride. So that was a quick and dirty recap. And it brings us to our passage. Our passage is the morning after, from Act 4 of A Midsummer Night's Dream. The four young lovers have woken up, and as I said, they realize that there's no more conflict, that there's a man for every woman and a woman for every man, and everyone likes the one they're with. Bottom, in a different part of the forest, also wakes up. His head has been put back to normal, and he has a vague idea that something extraordinary happened last night, but can't say quite what. And so this is the scene I'm going to read, and I've bitten off, hopefully not more than I can chew, but it's going to be interesting. We'll see how we do, because there's a lot of characters in this scene. And so I'm going to try to shift my voice in a way that indicates when someone new is speaking. And if I have to, if I think the context isn't clear, I will mention who is speaking when it changes. I've done a little redaction on the scene. I've removed a few lines that aren't really useful for our purposes, and I'll do my best. But here is the morning after scene. It begins with the four young lovers waking up, and with a court hunting party led by Duke Theseus stumbling upon them in the woods. And so Theseus and Hippolyta are there, and Hermia's father is there also, in a rage because his daughter tried to escape last night. And so these characters encounter the four young lovers, and they have a conversation, and then everyone leaves the stage, and Bottom stumbles onto the stage and thinks a little bit about what happened to him. So here we go. I'm going to do my best to read this. So imagine Theseus on the stage. He's just dismounted from his horse or something like that, and he realizes that he recognizes these young people, although their clothes are probably all torn and shredded and they're covered in grass stains and things like that. But he recognizes them, and it's his job to bring resolution. So Theseus says, "I pray you all stand up. I know you two are rival enemies. How comes this general concord in the world, that hatred is so far from jealousy, to sleep by hate and fear no enmity?" Lysander says, "My lord, I shall reply amazedly, half asleep, half waking. But as yet I swear I cannot truly say how I came here. But as I think, for truly would I speak, and now I do bethink me, so it is, I came with Hermia hither. Our intent was to be gone from Athens, where we might, without the peril of the Athenian law." Hermia's father Aegeus, "Enough, enough, my lord, you have enough. I beg the law upon his head. They would have stolen away. They would, Demetrius, thereby to have defeated you and me. You of your wife, and me of my consent that she should be your wife." Demetrius, "My fair lord, fair Helen told me of their stealth, of this their purpose hither to this wood, and I in fury hither followed them, but fair Helena in fancy following me. But my good lord, I wot not by what power, but by some power it is, my love to Hermia, melted as the snow, seems to me now as the remembrance of an idle gaud which in my childhood I did dote upon, and all the faith, the virtue of my heart, the object and the pleasure of mine eye, is only Helena. To her, my lord, was I betrothed ere I saw Hermia, but like in sickness I did loathe this food, but as in health, come to my natural taste, now I do wish it, love it, long for it, and will forevermore be true to it." Theseus, "Fair lovers, you are fortunately met. Of this discourse we will hear more anon. Aegeus, I will overbear your will, for in the temple by and by with us these couples shall eternally be knit. And for the morning now is something worn, our purpose hunting shall be set aside. Away with us to Athens, 3 and 3, we'll hold a feast in great solemnity. Come, Hippolyta." So Theseus, Hippolyta, Aegeus, and some others exeunt, and the four young lovers are on stage. Demetrius, in his confusion, says, "These things seem small and undistinguishable, like far-off mountains turned into clouds." Hermia, "Methinks I see these things with parted eye, when everything seems double." Helena, "So methinks, and I have found Demetrius like a jewel mine own and not mine own." Demetrius, "Are you sure that we are awake? It seems to me that yet we sleep, we dream. Do you not think the Duke was here and bid us follow him?" Hermia, "Yea, and my father." Demetrius, "Why then, we are awake, let's follow him, and by the way, let us recount our dreams." So now the four young lovers leave the stage, and as I said, Bottom stumbles onto the stage. He has just woken up. He didn't know that he had been wearing the head of an ass all night. He thinks no time at all has passed. He just wakes up and believes the play rehearsal is still going on. And so his speech begins with him calling out to his fellow performers. "When my cue comes, call me, and I will answer. My next is most fair Pyramus. Hey ho, Peter Quince. Flute the bellows mender. Snout the tinker. Starveling. God's my life stolen hence and left me asleep. I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream, past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Methought I was, there is no man can tell what. Methought I was, and methought I had, but man is but a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom. I will sing it at the latter end of a play before the Duke. Exit. So there we are. I hope that was coherent enough. So, the forest at nighttime is a dangerous and exciting place. We are away from the city for 3 acts of this play. The play begins in Athens and it ends in Athens. But in Acts 2 through 4, we are in the forest, a place of danger and excitement, of threat and liberation, of opportunities of various kinds to win or lose. Shakespeare's forest in this play is a kind of heightened reality, a place where desire is closer than it normally is to fulfillment. And so the forest in A Midsummer Night's Dream is like the forest of Arden in As You Like It. It's a little bit in some ways like Portia's Belmont in Merchant of Venice, the place where you could win the beautiful heiress and all her money or else lose everything because of the promise you make, if you know Merchant of Venice and the casket test. It's a little bit like the pastoral space of Bohemia in A Winter's Tale. All of these places can be described with the phrase, the green world, which comes from the literary critic, the mid-20th century literary critic Northrop Frye. The green world is the term he uses in describing a place and an idea within Shakespearean comedy, often a place where the action moves to and then moves back from. And so it is a place that is rural or sylvan, forested rather than urban. It's got associations with the pastoral tradition. And the green world is also a place marked out by a kind of holiday atmosphere. Because in the green world, you are away from the everyday. and everything that the everyday carries with it, from constraints of culture and law. You're away from the grind. You're away from rules about status, and you're away from the status quo itself. And so you're in a place where the everyday is suspended. And so you're in a place where girls can dress as boys. You're in a place where low and high can intermix with each other and rub shoulders in a way they normally can't. And as I said, that makes it a space of freedom, but also a threatening space. And people don't come back from the green world the same as they were when they entered it. Shakespeare's green world has the potential for healing, for sorting things out, for righting wrongs, for bringing about justice and bringing a sense of regeneration for the wider world around it. But it is also a space where you could lose. And so the lovers the previous night almost lost big, because in the forest, all of the passions that they were nurturing in the city have become unleashed. The two young men are at each other's throats. Violence is threatened. The two young women go from being the best of friends to the worst of enemies because jealousy flames up between them. The two young lovers decide, and this is because of the effects of the love potion, but they decide neither of them anymore loves Hermia and both love Helena. And so they're at each other's throats. And if Oberon didn't intervene again and have Puck make sure the right person falls in love with the right person, they could have been destroyed. But this is comedy, and so they're not. Let's work through the passage I just quoted. This passage begins with Theseus encountering the lovers, and then moves to a brief conversation just between the four of them, and then concludes with Bottom coming on stage. A Midsummer Night's Dream opposes, it's structured thematically around an opposition between the everyday world, what Rosalind in As You Like It calls the working day world, between the everyday world and alternate modes of human experience. Magic, right? This is a play that's full of fairies who do magic. So magic and the supernatural, clear opposition to the objective, solid, everyday world. Love, which induces a kind of passionate experience that is akin to magic. And the theater. All of these are experiences that stand in this play in contrast to normal quotidian life. And so the four young lovers in the morning when they wake up, they are on the kind of borderline between the forest and the city, between night and morning, morning, the daytime, connected to reason, traditionally, the sun, which shines its light and makes everything clear. That's opposed to the night that they've just experienced. And so all of these lovers wake up and aren't sure, first of all, whether they're still sleeping or not and dreaming, or whether what they lived through was a dream. And so Theseus comes into this little bit of meadow in the forest and sees these young lovers all together. And he says, well, all of you were at odds 5 minutes ago. You and Lysander and Demetrius are rival enemies. What's going on? He says, how comes this gentle concord in the world? How come you, who were so jealous, are now all sleeping side by side in the forest and appear to be peacefully reconciled? What happens? What happened? There's a mystery here. How did this come about? What has changed? And Lysander is the first spokesman for the group, and he says that he will reply amazedly, half sleep, half waking. Lysander says, I don't know how I got here. I don't know quite what happened, but I think I came with Hermia into the forest in order to evade Athenian law that would compel her to marry another man, but I don't really understand it. I don't know what brought this about. Last night feels so far away. Hermia's crusty father, Aegeus, intervenes at this point, demanding that he get satisfaction. He is a rich old father, and he wants to compel his daughter to do what suits him practically rather than what suits her emotionally. And of course, in a comedy, we know whose side we're on. And so he attempts to enlist Demetrius once again, the lover that he had chosen for his daughter, to support him, saying that we've both been robbed of her. But Demetrius no longer cares. He says, I came here in order to intervene and get Hermia back, but something happened. And again, he can't put into words what it was. He says, I wot not, I know not by what power, but by some power it is. My love for Hermia left me, and now I love Helen. And so, no, I'm no longer interested in marrying your daughter. And he says, my love for Hermia now seems as the remembrance of an idle gaud, a gaudy trinket or bauble, which in my childhood I did dote upon. But now it no longer means anything to me. Think about how that squares with your own experiences, where something at one phase in your life can seem absolute and overriding. And then with the passage of time, usually not after a single night, but maybe sometimes after the passage of time, it seems a thing indifferent to you. What is it that happens when that comes about? We are creatures who like to believe that we are on top of ourselves, that we are aware of ourselves, that our motives and desires are explicable and straightforward. And yet we are mysterious creatures who are not actually in complete control of ourselves. And for Shakespeare, this is a thing of fascination. I did think I loved Hermia, but I do not know what happened to that love. And now Helena, the person I was actually betrothed to a few years ago, seems precious to me. Theseus has heard enough. He wants everything tidied up happily. He does not want to execute any young women for defiance of the father if he doesn't have to. And so as far as he is concerned, this is a win. He has 4 people, and they have happily arranged themselves into couples. And so he says, Aegeus, I'm going to overrule you. We don't really have a problem here anymore. Maybe we had a problem when 2 men both loved the same woman. But at this point, it's 1-to-1. And so we're going to call it enough. And you know what? I'm going to suggest that you 2 couples get married with me and my bride-to-be a little bit later. Let's go back to Athens and let's all of us go to the temple and get hitched. And so that's what will happen in the play. The 2 pairs of lovers will get married alongside Theseus and Hippolyta. And so at this point, the Duke and his entourage leave the stage, and the 4 young lovers are left to try and sort this out. And so Demetrius, as we heard, says, these things seem small and undistinguishable, like far-off mountains, turn it into clouds. So everything that has just happened, he says, is hard to comprehend. I cannot really make it out. It's like far-off mountains. It's like a ridge of mountains on the far distant horizon where you're not sure whether it's a range of mountains or a line of clouds that you're looking at. I can see it barely, but I can't make it out. And I certainly can't understand it fully. Something has happened. I know that much, but I don't know quite what it was. And Hermia then says, Methinks I see things with a parted eye when everything seems double, so I seem to have double vision, like someone who's been conked on the head or who has been drunk. Everything seems double. And Helena says that this is especially true to her when it comes to the fact that she says, I found Demetrius like a jewel. Now, she has been hounding Demetrius for months. She has been chasing after him, trying to get him to turn around and say a nice word to her. And over again, he has been saying, get away from me. I'm not interested. I want Hermia. I'm not interested. Leave me alone. I'm not interested. And now he's hers. She's found him like a jewel, mine own and not mine own. I love that line, mine own and not mine own. He belongs to me, but he's also beyond me. I have him, but I don't have him. He's mine, but he's also free. And somehow this just happened. And so all of them in their various ways are saying something's happened which we don't understand. And of course, this is connected throughout the play, obviously, pointedly in their situation. But on a wider thematic level, this is how Shakespeare is exploring the idea of love, the mysterious power of love, which seems so overwhelming and so absolute to the one experiencing it, and yet does not make clear, hard sense. It is not something that you could plot out on a piece of graph paper. It is not a mathematical problem that you can work through in order to get an answer. There's something too mysterious about it for that. And so Demetrius has to ask again. He says, are you sure that we are awake? It seems to me that yet we sleep, we dream. And so this is the dreamer's confusion that most of us have experienced at one time or another. Am I still dreaming? Is this true? Is this part of the dream, or was the other thing the dream? But I think Demetrius says the Duke was here. That would be the strangest turn of all in the dream, but I think the Duke was here and asked us to go with him. And so he says, let's follow him, and by the way, let us recount our dreams. So we will try to piece this together. We will trade stories about what we think happened, because all we know for sure is that we woke up in the forest, and now Helena and I are happily in love, and and Hermia and Lysander appear to be happily in love. That's all we know. And then there are these shadows on the mind, which tease us with the idea, or with the whisper of how it maybe came about. And so we've got an experience here that is beyond comprehension. And it comes to a head in Bottom's dream. The speech, that's the name sometimes given to the speech that follows, that Bottom speaks. In his speech, both the confusion, the surface level confusion, and the deeper thematic coherence are foregrounded. Bottom comes on stage, and he too has fragmentary memories of what happened the night before, and he too can only think that it must have been a dream, but it was a beautiful dream. He doesn't know that he was transformed into an ass, and he doesn't remember clearly that the beautiful queen of the faeries was in love with him and was doting on him and was trying to satisfy his desires. All he knows is that he's now awake and that he thinks he's been abandoned by his fellow cast members who aren't anywhere to be seen. Now, those cast members ran off the previous evening when Bottom had stalked off stage in a huff because the rehearsal wasn't going the way he wanted it to. Bottom wasn't getting enough attention and wasn't getting enough deference because Bottom is an egomaniac. And so he had stalked off in a huff, and so Puck had found him and given him the head of an ass. And then Bottom wandered back to the rehearsal and scared all the other cast members out of their wits, and so they ran away. And that's when the Fairy Queen saw him and fell in love. Now his head has been returned to normal, and he's trying to make sense of this. But he had been in a different reality. Peter Quince, his friend, the director of this theatrical endeavor, when he saw Bottom with his head transformed and everyone was flipping out, it's a wonderful phrase. He says, "Bless thee, Bottom, bless thee. Thou art translated. Thou art translated." Translated. Obviously, we associate that word with language, to translate a sentence from one language into another. And the same idea is still there, although the word can be used in wider contexts. Quince doesn't just say thou art changed, but thou art translated. And the phrase suggests change, but it suggests a kind of transcendent change, because it is a word that can be used when the subject is spiritual, to be removed from one level of existence into a higher level of existence. So thou art translated. It's funny because Quince sees Bottom and he sees a monstrous freak, a man with the head of an ass, and Bottom has no idea. Bottom believes he's the smartest and most talented person in any room. And so he doesn't know that everyone who looks at him sees him wearing the head of an ass. But he does say, when all of his fellow cast members are scrambling around in terror trying to get away, he says very acutely, although without meaning to be acute, "This is to make an ass of me." In other words, you all are screwing around, trying to embarrass me, to make a fool of me. This is to make an ass of me. And so he has become ridiculous. What could be more ridiculous than a man with a donkey's head? But he has also been translated. It is both a piece of nonsense and also a beautiful mystery, because this one with the ass's head will shortly become the beloved of the Fairy Queen. Bottom is a clown. He's one of Shakespeare's great clowns. Shakespeare sometimes, speaking technically, in his comedies, gives us clowns, bumblers. And sometimes he gives us fools. And the words can sometimes be interchangeable, although on the technical, and clowns are very foolish, but on the technical level, you laugh at a clown and you laugh with a fool. A fool in Shakespearean comedy like Feste in Twelfth Night, or Lavache in All's Well That Ends Well, or even Lear's fool in King Lear, Touchstone in As You Like It, is a professional jester. He's a wordsmith whose job is to pop the balloons of pretension and nonsense, to expose things, to get everyone laughing so that they recognize the ridiculous. Clowns, however, are bumblers, and we laugh at them, and that's Bottom. Bottom's character would have been played almost certainly by an actor in Shakespeare's company, at least in the first half of his career, the Lord Chamberlain's man, an actor named Will Kemp, who was a brilliant clowner, who had an exquisite ability for physical comedy and for nonsense wordplay. And so Bottom speaks, as anyone who knows the play, even with passing familiarity, knows, that Bottom speaks with malapropisms. In other words, he confuses his words without knowing it. And so, we still laugh at that today, the idea of a stupid person who thinks he's smart and uses language unknowingly, clumsily, and poorly. So Bottom does that. Bottom is not just awkward and foolish, but he's also a creature of vanity. He believes he is brilliant and speaking wisdom. And so he's very thin-skinned and egomaniacal. He is a perfect clown. And yet, even as we laugh at Bottom, the play is telling us that we are bottom, that we are all clowns. Puck, the fairy trickster, says as he's talking to Oberon in the middle of the play, it's one of the most famous lines in the play, "Lord, what fools these mortals be! Lord, what fools these mortals be!" And it's not necessarily a funny line, but it usually gets a laugh in the theater because generally the actor playing Puck has a kind of delight in the recognition that mortals are fools. But perhaps we also laugh at it because we know it to be true. And if we're healthy, we know it to be true of ourselves, that we are all fools. There are worse things than being a fool. And there is a kind of folly that approaches wisdom. Bottom, on the one hand, is a boob. He doesn't know which way is up, and he has no idea how full of nonsense he is. He has no idea that he's wearing the head of an ass. And yet bottom, in his folly, is maybe closer to wisdom than some who are accounted or who account themselves wise. There is a kind of folly that is wise, at least when compared to the so-called wisdom of the hard-headed, ruthless pragmatist. So what do I mean by this? Well, from one perspective, certainly from the perspective of the hard-headed pragmatist, the fool is a fool because he does what's right rather than because he does what's expedient. The fool is a fool because he takes a risk rather than doing what is safe. At its most extreme, the fool is a fool because he sacrifices himself. It's a stupid thing to do from the perspective of our hard-headed pragmatist, to sacrifice yourself, to forego an advantage so that someone else can have it, to put principle ahead of, say, security or prosperity. That's foolish. And yet it's a kind of folly that is true wisdom rather than that hard-headed accountant's wisdom that would tell you, look after yourself, forget about other people, guard what's yours, don't ever get taken in. That kind of wisdom is the deeper folly. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians talks about how the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men. And that brings us back to that point about sacrifice, because Paul is talking about the cross. He's talking about the fact that according to worldly understandings, the cross is ridiculous and it doesn't make sense. But that is because the cross is an expression of love. And there is no love button on your calculator. Love involves risk and sacrifice. Love involves vulnerability, opening oneself up. Vulnerability comes from the Latin word for wound, to be woundable. You cannot love with a suit of armor on. Love involves the risk of the heart, and so love is foolishness from the perspective of someone who is only thinking about power or advantage. You know, Iago, Shakespeare's most terrifying nihilist in Othello, Iago talks about how if he ever gets caught out doing anything naive or being sincere or anything like that, he says, I shall wear my heart upon my sleeve for daws to peck at. And even if we don't know Othello, all of us have heard the phrase to wear the heart upon the sleeve. And so it's such a familiar statement that we don't even think about it. And yet it's a fascinating statement, the image of the heart worn upon the sleeve. Biologically speaking, it is to our advantage that our hearts are in our chest behind our rib cages. To wear the heart upon the sleeve is to expose the heart, to risk it and to endanger it so that even a passing bird could peck at it. It is to be vulnerable. And Iago, who can understand other people's motives so well and understand their insecurities and how to exploit them so well, does not understand that that gesture of vulnerability could be anything other than foolish, and doesn't recognize, doesn't see that that kind of vulnerability can offer transcendence. And so Bottom's dream sums so much of this up with extraordinary humor and economy. He wakes up wondering where the others are, imagining that the play is still going on, that the dream hasn't ended and that the play rehearsal hasn't ended, and that there's maybe no difference between them. And so he's calling out to his fellow cast members and no one's answering. And then finally the penny drops and he realizes that he's been asleep and that they've left him. I've had a most rare dream. I have had a dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Past the wit of man to say what dream it was. The dream was of such profundity that human wisdom, human wit cannot encompass it. And so Bottom says, man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Man is but a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. You're an ass or a fool if you try to explain this. It's a challenge to you, the audience member. Bottom is the ass, Bottom is the fool. And yet Bottom is saying to you that if you think you understand what he experienced, you are the ass, you are the fool. You cannot get to the bottom of it, right? In another wonderful malapropism, he says of his dream that he's going to go and get his friend Peter Quince to write a ballad of it. Even though he's just said that no one can express it, he's going to get Peter Quince to express it. And he says, not realizing how ridiculous he is, he says that it shall be called Bottom's Dream because it hath no bottom. It's going to be called Bottom's Dream because it hath no bottom. It's going to be called Bottom's Dream because his name is Bottom, of course. But he's also saying it hath no bottom. You know, if you are taking soundings on a ship, you have a long length of rope with knots at regular intervals, every fathom. And there's a weight on the end of the rope. And you would drop it over the side of the ship in order to see how many fathoms beneath the ship the seabed lies. So that you know that if you're in 7 fathoms of water, it's very shallow and you might rip the hull of your ship out. Or perhaps you let the line down as long as you can, 100 fathoms or something like that, and you still haven't found the bottom. The water is too deep. It's beyond you. If you're on a ship, that's a good thing because you know you're not going to be running aground. But for something to have no bottom is to say that it can't be sounded. It can't be summed up. If it's a well, the bottom is deeper down than your plumb line can go. And so for something to have no bottom is for it to be inexplicable, to be beyond. And so he'll call it Bottom's Dream because it hath no bottom. The passage contains, and some of you probably will have caught this, one of Shakespeare's most famous biblical allusions. A few minutes ago, I referred to Paul's mention of the foolishness of God in 1 Corinthians, the foolishness of God that is wiser than the wisdom of men. And Bottom here is making another allusion to 1 Corinthians in his wonderful, messed up, confused statement about how the eye of man hath not erred, etc., etc. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 2. This is the Apostle Paul, and he is speaking about divine love. But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. I'll read that again. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. The Spirit goes down to the bottom. The Spirit can search out the deep things of God, but the eye of man has not seen and the ear of man has not heard the truth of them. They are too much. And so Bottom, of course, mangles this in his unwitting allusion to 1 Corinthians, because he says, the eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to touch, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. Well, of course it is. Eyes can't hear, ears can't see, hands can't taste, tongues can't conceive, and hearts can't report. Bottom has scrambled these organs and their functions up and made a piece of nonsense out of it. But that allusion to Paul has a weight which goes beyond the surface level nonsense. Bottom is trying to tell us that even though we've watched him have this experience, and even though we think we understand what happens, and we could pull him aside and say, here, look, Nick, this is what happened. A fairy changed your head so that it resembled that of an ass, and then the fairy queen fell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what happened. Bottom is saying this experience is beyond anyone's explanation. He has been touched by transcendence. And the subject here is not spiritual transcendence. It's not what Paul was describing. Shakespeare isn't Paul, and he's got different purposes than Paul. He's using Paul's words about the Spirit and transcendence to talk about something else, but something which is nevertheless full of grace, or potentially at least. In the speech that we began the episode with, in Act 5 of the play, Theseus's fiancée Hippolyta says to him, "Isn't it strange, the stuff that those four lovers have been talking about?" And Theseus decides to lecture her on how they've been talking a bunch of stuff. He says, "More strange than true. Yeah. You know teenagers. I never may believe these antique fables, nor these fairy toys," he says. "Yeah, they came back from the forest, and something happened last night. They were probably under the influence. And now they're all happy. I consider that a win. Let's move on. But nothing happened. It's all the effects of alcohol and overheated libidos." He says, "I never may believe these antique fables." The irony, of course, is that this character who is speaking is an antique fable. He is a character out of Greek mythology. He is a fairy toy. And he's telling his wife, who's also out of Greek mythology, not to believe in antique fables. And he goes on and makes the famous statement, "The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact." The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. That's a wonderful little triad. The madman, the lover, and the poet are all put on an equivalent footing by Theseus. And perhaps there is some truth in that linkage, but how much? The lover and the poet, and for poet you could also substitute dramatist, because the dramatist is a poet. Shakespeare is both of those things. The lover and the dramatist are being equated here to the madman. As I said earlier, this play continually opposes certain modes of the human experience to, quote, normal waking reality, as we think of it. Magic, nighttime, the theater, and love. The play will end at night, on the wedding night of the three couples. It will end after they have seen the sublime piece of bumbling that is Pyramus and Thisbe performed by the rude mechanicals. So it ends with theater. It ends with love, of course, as they go off to their marriage beds, and it ends with magic, because Oberon and Titania bless the marriage beds after the three young couples go to sleep. Magic, theater, love. They're all realities that cannot be pinned down. Their bottoms cannot be sounded by human intelligence. A neurologist can exhaustively scan your brain and show you all the different parts of the brain that light up when you have different experiences, when someone reads poetry to you, when you think about love. But that is not an explanation of the reality of the phenomenon. It may show you which part of your brain is being affected by the experience, but it is not an exhaustive explanation of what it means. The bottom has not been sounded. And Theseus is our hard-headed rationalist in this speech. It's a great debunking speech. The only problem is that it fails completely to articulate what's really happening in the play. And so he may not believe these antique fables. He may be an exponent of what he calls cool reason. And so he says, cool reason looks at the madman who's gibbering, imagining there's all kinds of devils, and knows not to take him seriously. Cool reason shakes its head when the lover believes that he can see Helen's beauty in an ordinary face. Cool reason would look at that ordinary face and see there's not much beauty there, certainly not the beauty of Helen of Troy. And yet is not the lover who sees that beauty perhaps the one who's seeing what's really there? And the person who looks at that face through the lens of cool reason and thinks, it's just an average face. Perhaps he is the one who's missing the truth of things. Perhaps it's the lover who can apprehend the beauty of the beloved in a way that the rest of us can't, because we are not really looking that is closer to the heart of things. This is not a play that lectures us and sermonizes. Theseus sermonizes, but the play undermines his sermon. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare isn't offering us a philosophical treatise about metaphysics or about love. He's teasing us with the idea that the world is richer and more complex than our cool reason would have us believe, and also that his art is too. And I think that's where we'll leave it for today. So on behalf of Eric Williams, this is David Anderson, thanking you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.